seek, above all, for a game worth playing. Oh baby, it's witchcraft contagious. I've felt it for ages. We're out of these cages in this house of mages. It's witchcraft, it's dangerous. Beware of these pages. There's spells of all flavors in this house of mages. In this house of mages. In this house of mages.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Make Yoga Magic Again, the House of Mages podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Aurelian Cumming. The House of Mages is an online school of yoga, tantra, and the magical arts. We run yoga teacher training and have a membership platform that gives you access to an extensive curriculum in developing your magical abilities with some of the best teachers in the world on various esoteric arts. This is one I've looked forward to since I started the podcast. In this episode, I chat with author and magician in every sense of the word, Michael Kelly. Born in 1965 on the Isle of Man, a descendant of Celts and Vikings, Michael was brought up on fairy tales told by people who actually still believed in fairies. It's small wonder that he grew up having learned to see around a corner or two, born into this land of magic and mystery. Even after earning disapproval for them during his schooling all the way into his career, his interest in mysticism and the transformative power of storytelling continued, but in a subdued and submissive way, until the day someone asked him to write a book. Not just any old book, but a book on the ancient Celts, their beliefs and their worldview. Thus, he sat down, struggled to learn the disciplines of writing, and eventually finished the Book of Ogham. Now, nearly 20 years later, Michael Kelly has authored well over 30 books, including the groundbreaking Apophis and its expanded titles. Previously a master of the Order of Leviathan, an order within the well-respected mystery school, the Temple of Set, he dived deeply into the serpentine mysteries, eventually founding what is now known as the Apophis Club. This is a very personal interview for me. Michael Kelly has perhaps been the most influential person on my magical journey. It was his books that I found about 10 years ago that really gave me the blueprint in which I've been able to build and expand upon my own growth and development. I even trekked to the other side of the world to a small island called the Isle of Man to meet Michael in person, and was accepted as an apprentice by him in the school known as the Rune Guild, in which he is also an active member and teacher within. So, as you can imagine, I'm pretty excited to not only sit down with Michael for this podcast, but to now be sharing his paradigm-shattering wisdom with you all. So, without further ado, occult and fiction author, bizarre magician, and mischievous jester, Michael Kelly.
Okay, and we are live. And Michael, thanks for joining me.
Oh, my pleasure, Daniel. My pleasure.
So I've been wanting to have this chat, I guess, as a proper podcast for a while. So I think it's been close to 10 years since I found your work. So I think originally I found your work through, I ordered a few books from Rune back when Rune was operating, and I had your book, Xeper-i-set. And I was actually, it was really early in my magical journey, and I was scouring the internet for different magical sigils and all these kind of things. And I actually found just a picture of the Xeper-i-set, and I was really intrigued by it, and I couldn't stop staring at it. And out of nowhere, I had a panic attack. It was the weirdest thing. I probably only ever had a panic attack once in my entire life. Before that, my heart started beating, I started sweating, and I had no idea what was going on. And I went and chilled out for a bit, made a cup of tea. And then afterwards, I was like, what the F was that? And
well, that's quite appropriate. You know, it is the helm of awe. It represents both the mesmerizing and the terrifying gaze of the serpent. So to be mesmerized by it and have a panic attack is it's really quite appropriate. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's the strangest thing, and I've never had anything like that happen since. But so obviously I was like, what is this symbol? And I realized that I had your book, Igaselm. So, because I was like, I think I have a book with that same name. And then so I started reading it, and just the way you wrote, your philosophy on the runes and just everything in general just resonated with me so much. And then I straight away the next day, because I devoured like most of the book in that one evening, and then I ordered Apophis the next day. And as soon as I read Apophis, it just felt like everything clicked. And it felt like the way that I've been viewing the cosmos and the world and just life, but not being able to articulate it or even fully understand it. It was just all in Apophis. And then I just got obsessed. And since then, I think I have most of your books. And yeah, you've been an amazing teacher, mentor, and friend as well, just to be able to connect with you like this and ask you questions. And and you apprentice me in the Rune Guild as well. Has been amazing, and I'm very appreciative. So yeah, really looking forward to delving into how the Apophis curriculum came to be. Is there a certain point that you would say that, because we were talking earlier how when you have ideas for books and things, they're usually 5, 6 or more years in percolation. So is there a defining point where you felt like the stir of the serpent, or that this was leading towards where it's come to be now?
Well, the first inklings of it, I guess, were round about 2003, and Apophis, the book, was published in 2009. So yeah, there was a 6-year build-up to that. And the first appearance of some of the chapters of the book was actually in a little red-covered journal that I used to publish every quarter. And again, that would be in the mid-2000s, the mid-2000s, 2004, 5, and so on. And that was called Apophis as well. Mm-hmm. And certainly the material relating to the first 3 heads of the dragon, which is concerning the physical body, the development of the mind, and then the bridging of the conscious-subconscious divide, the unlocking of psychic abilities and so on, as we would call them. They all appeared in that early journal. And they were edited and updated for the book, but that's where they had their origin. And of course, before I could start writing about any of that, I had to have this idea of hanging a system of initiation upon the 7 heads of the dragon in the first place. The idea of that would go back to my time in the Temple of Set and the Order of Leviathan.
Yeah, well, maybe we can talk about that, because I think a lot of the listeners might not know of how you came to, I guess, start in your magical journey and your journey through. So if you wanted to talk a little bit about that and explain how that kind of led you to where you're at.
Well, I spent quite a few years in the Temple of Set, and the temple has a series of orders, which are, I guess, they're specialized schools. Each order is run by a master of the temple, and it represents their particular take on initiation. So, for example, there's the Order of the Trapezoid, which focuses on runes and Germanic magic and strange angles and their effect on the mind and so on. There's the Order of Shuti, which is more philosophically based and weighs up the concept of opposites, which everything having its opposite pole. The Order of the Vampire, for those who like that kind of darkly glamorous aesthetic. And the Order of Leviathan, it appealed to me, firstly because it's named after an ancient dragon, but also because it had a massive book which was only available to order members. And the appeal of a massive book to somebody like me is enormous. And but also it claimed to be the order which taught immortality.
Mm-hmm.
And this was a big draw. But the more I began to study it, and the whole idea of ancient dragons, the image of the dragon with 7 heads, it's present in so many ancient mythologies. Probably the best known would be Tiamat from the Babylonian myth, who's probably best known because of Dungeons and Dragons, where she was featured in the original Monster Manual as one of the dragons there. But there was also the Egyptian Mehen. And each of these heads represented a quality. And this appears again in the Book of Revelation, of course, the 7-headed beast. And I started looking into what those qualities might be, because as my time went on in the temple, I became the Grand Master of the Order of Leviathan. It was placed in my hands. And it was the realization that this dragon represents agelessness, timelessness, and everything that was before the universe existed. This is a concept which is beyond the confines of time and space. And the 7 heads, if you like, they are the way in which consciousness projected itself into manifestation and the universe came into being. The dragon itself remains in that primordial state, but the 7 heads come into manifestation. And since we ourselves are one of the manifest parts of the universe, and since we possess consciousness, it makes sense that these 7 heads are within every one of us. Because the whole purpose of a being which predates the universe in creating a universe is to discover itself, to see itself mirrored, and to come to know itself by the permutations of consciousness as it interacts with other aspects and changes and transforms. That's the wonder of the universe and of life. So there have been a few attempts over the years to try to map these 7 heads and what they represent. The one which spoke to me most clearly and which is defined most clearly was the one which Kenneth Grant specified in his series of books, which generally go under the title the Typhonian Trilogies. It's actually a trilogy of trilogies. There are 3 of them, and they're very expensive to get hold of these days. But the first head, for instance, is physical existence. It's the physical body. Because if you're in a manifest world, you need a manifest brain to interact with it. Then it's the mind and the emotions. And then it's the realization that the mind has different layers. There's the conscious, the subconscious, the unconscious. And so many of our thought processes, well, we're completely unaware of on a surface level. There's so much that goes on in our heads that we just don't know about. So it's the training of the body and the mind to be as efficient as possible. We're all programmed all the time by outside influences. Some deliberate, some that we just absorb because they're all around us. And so much of our thinking isn't our own. So it's learning to discover who we really are and how to think clearly, how to control our thoughts, how to direct our thoughts, how to stop our thoughts, how to realize when our hot buttons are being pushed and we're just reacting instead of acting. And through doing all these things, we can start to bridge that gap between the conscious and subconscious parts of the mind. And this leads to insights that we may not otherwise have had. And this does involve the physical body too, which is why I always start with it. It's crucial to living life, because we miss so many physical cues as well. One of the parts of that first head work is learning to really pay attention to our senses, because so much of, they're taking in data all the time from the world around us, but how much of it do we actually notice?
It's crazy how much we miss.
Yeah, our brain creates, as a natural function, and it's an important function, but it creates filters that decide, yeah, this is important, we need to know that. The rest can just get filed deep in the subconscious. We've seen it, but we don't need to know it. So it's learning to look and to listen and to touch with full awareness, and to deliberately use your senses to the maximum ability that you're capable of. So if you walk into a room, you become accustomed to the first thing you do. You look around, you take notice of the details, which normally you don't pay attention to. You look at the pattern on the carpet. You look at the decorations around the place. Are there pictures on the walls? What are they of? What titles are on that bookshelf? What papers are on that desk? This person you're seeing for the first time. You see it in movies when somebody's asked to describe someone, if they've been a witness to a crime or something. Oh, he was sort of medium height and had dark hair, and they run out of words. But you should be able to take in all the details, every last little item of clothing and so on, as to how a person looks, how they sound, what their voice is like, how they smell. And these are fascinating exercises to do. Of course, you'd go mad if you did it continually. But in the curriculum, you take specific times to really focus on these things. And in doing that, you're training your mind to know that you want to notice, that you want your senses to expand.
And I loved how the curriculum could be weaved into day-to-day life, because some things I've heard, it's like you need to disappear for 1 to 3 months and then do all this stuff in order to make a proper ritual and things. And at the time when I first found Apophis and I was doing the sense training, I was working a 9-to-5 job 5 days a week. So I was in a shopping center in retail. So I mapped, like you said in Apophis, to map the senses to the days of the week. So Monday it was sight, Tuesday it was sound. And it's so interesting how it was eye-opening in so many ways. There was actually a brand of hat called Dragon that I was trying to find. And I really wanted this hat because it had this really good sigil of a dragon on it. And when I was doing this, I was perfect. And I couldn't find it anywhere. I looked in all the shopping centers around the neighborhood and around the town I was living in, couldn't find it anywhere. On the Monday in the shopping center that I was working at, I made it my goal for the day to walk past every store and then look at all their inventory. So on my break, I went for a walk past the third store next to my store that I walk past at least 5 or 6 times every day, scanned their inventory. Right in their window was a hat with the brand of Dragon, with the word Dragon underneath it. But because I was so used to walking past that store every day, my mind blocked it out. I was like, no, you know what's in there. But I actually had no idea what was in there. So I like the metaphor of it too. I had to think like a dragon to find the dragon. It was just amazing. I had no idea I was doing that.
And all of these things, these are just natural abilities that we have that we don't use to their fullest. But it's by expanding these that we start to get towards what most people would really call magical material. But in their own right, they are fantastic things to do. So, even a complete skeptic who doesn't believe in magic in any way, shape, or form can still experience a real transformation through the Apophis curriculum for that reason. We start with what's physical and what can't be denied, and then we build up. And by the time you start dealing with concepts which are a bit more out there, you're already accessing them. You can already touch them. You don't have to believe anything. You're experiencing things. And that was important to me as well. And when I talk about that sort of experience, I'm talking about what we call the fourth head experience of the dragon. And that is when you're able, in a sense, to look back into that primordial void that the whole universe came from, see the patterns which are emerging from it, and adjust them to change the world around you into a manifestation which is better. And that, of course, is what magic is. It's first it's changing you, but then it's changing the world as well. So, I mean, the description of the first couple of heads there might have sounded like just a self-development course, which it is, but there's much more to it than that. We're talking about the real deal, the ability to reach out and change the world.
But that's why I think it appealed to me, because it was practical, it was down to earth, and even if I didn't believe in magic, which at the time when I was starting to get into this stuff, I was very skeptical about the reality of all this, but I was having small wins. And that's the thing. I was like, well, if he's right about this and this works, then he's probably right about this. Yep, this works and this works. And it's creating that trust in the system as well, and those small wins. And then, like you said, once I started moving through the heads, it almost felt silly not to think that this would work. And it was just because everything had worked before that. And I think that's a really good way. And like you said, it just enhances your day-to-day life, regardless.
Yeah, it is important to me. It's something that should be experiential rather than somebody tells you this is the way things are and this is what you should believe. It arises from what you're discovering about yourself. And also, you mentioned earlier about the writing style of the books. That was important to me too when I came and put it down. You hear a lot of people who are mystically minded saying, "Oh, there are secrets that you can't communicate in language." That's nonsense. You can communicate them in language. If you cannot find the words to express a concept, then you don't understand it, and you shouldn't be trying to teach it. The degree to which those words are understood by an individual will differ, but it can be expressed in words. There may be concepts there which it's difficult to get your head around, but you can still understand the language they're expressed in and maybe grasp the idea and begin to work with it. I've often found that books by people I admire, I've gone back to in later years and read them again and found so much more in them that I just could not see the first time round. But again, they're writers who tend to use plain language. And if you're writing what is supposed to be a practical instructional book, which I was, I think it has to be written in that way, with lots of anecdotal material as well, because if people are looking to have experiences, they want to be learning about the kinds of experiences that maybe people have had. So I've always felt that to be important. I do not write academic texts. It's with I do write loads of footnotes, but they're usually for comical purposes. But I don't put lots of references in there. I like to spell things out in plain English, and that was important to me too.
Yeah, well, it made sense that because I didn't realize you wrote fiction as well, and stories after I found your initiatory books. So it makes sense now why the writing style is so engaging, because I just couldn't put it down. That's why I said I devoured most of the book in the first night I read it. Because it was just really easy to read and flow, and it was a good balance of the theory behind it and then examples of it and then exercises you can do. And it just really appealed to me. I really liked the writing style of it. It was really, really easy to consume. But also you're talking, I was just going to say, also you're talking about not hiding anything in there. But I swear every time, I've probably read Apophis maybe 8 or 9 times now, and I swear there's new stuff in there every time I read it. Every time I go back, I was like, something's going on with this book, and I swear this passage wasn't in here before. But yeah.
Yeah, there's it's not that I'm high. Sometimes I do put puns and so on in, which maybe you'll get at a certain time, but it's not deliberately hiding things. But you take in the concepts that you can grasp at a certain time, and I'm not talking down to anyone saying that. It's the same with me. If I read a book by, say, Don Webb or someone like that, I take in what I can get from it at a certain time. There may be more there if I go back to it later, when I've worked with those concepts and those practices myself for a while, and you start to recognize subtleties, which have always been there. It's just that you didn't realize it was a subtlety because you weren't thinking about the concept in a subtle way at that time.
Yeah.
So
yeah, like the statements of the serpent at the start of the book, I remember when I first read it, it just all went straight over my head. And maybe there's 1 or 2 of them that I could resonate with, and the rest, it was a part that I skipped past when I first read it because I just didn't understand it. But every time I've gone back to it, 1 or 2 of those has just like launched out at me, and I finally get it. I can feel the concept. And yeah, I think that's defined my year, really, because I try to reread Apophis once a year or so. And yeah, every time I read it, I feel like one of the statements of the serpent jumps out at me and kind of defines my year on what I'm focusing. So it's, I think that's really a testament to it. The fact that it does have that longevity, and I'm still getting more and more out of it the more I delve into it.
Yeah, those statements, I put those in the book deliberately. And in some ways, it's a strange fit, because whereas the rest of the book is practical instruction and discussion, there you have these strange visionary phrases, which, but that was a record of the magical working that I originally did after I left the Temple of Set, and I was saying, okay, what do I do now? Where do I go with this? And it's upon those statements, once you look in them, you can see they're not pointed out blatantly in black and white, but you can see where the meaning of the 7 heads comes from in it. And some of the subtleties which came out from that, because I keep finding more stuff in those as well, and I wrote them, which they spun off into later books, which developed a lot of those themes further.
Yeah, and that's another key piece of it I like as well, that this system, for anyone who doesn't know, has been used for a lot of different styles of magic as well. So I don't know how many you're up to. I think you've done about 6 volumes of something along those lines of different visions of the 7 heads curriculum, like on the runic idea and the Enochian.
Yeah, the Apophis itself, I always want to make virtually systemless, so that you could take it. It has no real attached mythology. there are a couple of deity names and so on brought in there, but it's basically systemless. Most of the exercises in it are things which you just do, and it's just you and your body, or you and your mind, or you and a piece of paper and a pen. And there's a lot of diary work and things like that, but it's systemless. And the idea then was, well, there's Apophis, I suppose, dragon scales, and draconian consciousness. They're the systemless trilogy, because those two expand upon Apophis. But then I thought this system will work if you can apply it within any mythology. And because I was working the runes and had been for a while, I thought I want to take the Apophis curriculum and shape a course of rune magic around it. How would I do that? Well, obviously for the physical work, you've got the rune postures, the rune yoga, or the Stadagalda, as it was called, and things such as that, and the physical act of carving runes. For the mental work, you've got the memorization of the rune meanings. You've got the whole idea of creating bind runes from them, and the rune poems. And then, of course, you get into deeper and deeper aspects of rune magic. And you've got the legends of the Norse dragons in there as well. There's the myth of Sigurd and Fafnir, who I use as the model for initiation. It's the ideal initiatory journey. The hero who overcomes the bestial part and wins its treasures through doing that, and by tasting its heart's blood, gains its powers, and is then able to approach divinity in the form of the Valkyrie. And of course, there's the world serpent, Jormungandr, the Midgard serpent in Norse lore, who defines the boundary between reality and the outside. And this takes us back to that idea of the dragon as being outside and beyond time and space. And then finally, and important to me, there was the dragon Nidhogg, who in Norse mythology is at the foot of the world tree, the eater of the dead, gnaws at the roots. But after Ragnarok, when there's a new world created and peace falls and everything again, Nidhogg flies up from the roots and is seen flying off into the distance, with that dragon dark becoming the serpent bright. And that transformation, that remanifestation, tying in with the Order of Leviathan's ideas, that to me was key to locking a runic curriculum down for it.
Yeah, and this I just want to touch on that, because the dragon dark to the serpent bright, I think, highlights a concept around everything to do with your work, is this idea of paradox. That I think, because like Everything and Nothing, your other book, which I would probably put in as well in that kind of paradigm neutral Apophis trilogy almost, but I guess that's more of an emotional journey for a lot of people, I think. So definitely not for the faint of heart. I had a bit of a journey with that book myself, but it was good. I love it. It's probably one of my favorites now, but initially I had to go back and reread a lot of bits and pieces here. And that's why I think your statement of the wordless Aeon, I really like and resonated with, and almost like the word is, a question mark, because it does incorporate everything, but also nothing. And so it's taken me a while to, I definitely wouldn't say I grasp it, because I feel like it's ingraspable, but I think I ride it now. I understand it's not meant to be grasped, it's meant to be ridden. And I guess it's constantly moving and changing. And as long as I accept that, I can kind of, ride it along. And I think that's just how I get your work, because it weaves through everything else. It's the in-between of everything else. It's like as soon as something is manifest, it's the thing that is weaving in and out. And I guess that's why the serpent iconography is really, and symbology is really good as well. But yeah, if you just wanted to maybe touch on that idea of the wordless aeon, if you wanted, and how you kind of interpret that and this idea of that everything and nothing paradox type of concept.
It's a concept which again goes back to Kenneth Grant. He talks in one of his books about the wordless aeon, or the aeon of Zayin, as he calls it, which was one of the Hebrew letters meaning a sword. It's attributed in the tarot, according to the Crowley Kabbalah and so on, which Grant worked with, to the tarot card, the Lovers, which obviously represents these two individuals, and it's that polarity of this and that, and everything and nothing. And it's interesting because the letter Z is the actual Zayin. If you take its name is Zayin, but if you take the Z, which is the sound it stands for away, you're left with the word Aeon, which was the Aeon Sophor, which meant the limitless light, or the nothing, which lay beyond the tree of life in the Kabbalistic system. So again, you were referring to this unmanifest state. We call it a void, we call it an abyss, but it's not empty because it's absolutely bursting and pregnant with possibility. It seems to be nothing because it's not a thing. It's too big for that. It's all potential. It's not yet manifest, but it's there and it's present and it's real. And this idea of something that couldn't be expressed, something that was wordless, contrary to what I was saying earlier about you should be able to express it in words, something that's too vast for that, because it incorporates everything. Everything there has its own opposite. For those who've read Crowley, it's his idea of the Kabbalistic zero, which comes back to zero because +1 plus -1 equals 0. But the zero only exists because of those two balancing poles. So the word aeon was in there as well, and I struggled for a while with this idea of the wordless aeon. It did appeal to me because it spoke to me of this concept of the void, which is absolutely charged with potential. And you get this again in rune magic, of course, and Norse mythology, where before everything else there was Ginnungagap, which Dr. Flowers translates as magically charged void, which again is pregnant with the possibility of everything. And I was juggling these ideas of a place which contained not only everything that is, because this idea of the void, it contains the universe. We're like a bubble within it, a manifest bubble within a much larger potential of what we could be. It contains everything that is. It contains everything that was, everything that will be. Not only that, everything that might be, but won't be. Everything that never was. Everything that never happened, but was thought about. They all exist as concepts in that term. And this is what leads to this idea of everything and nothing. And the idea of a wordless aeon, eventually I nailed it down, certainly for myself, by deciding that it's because that there wasn't a word that could express it, so that word was not. And I thought, yes, that word is not, N-O-T, because that means nothing. It's not. It doesn't exist as we understand the term yet. But it's also not, K-N-O-T, which is the not when ideas and concepts become wrapped around each other and something appears and it becomes manifest. Everything and nothing, that which is manifest that which is yet unmanifest. And they're both the word not with different spellings. And crucially, of course, that goes back to rune magic again with the ninefold knot, which is the Valknuter, Odin's knot of the slain, as it was called, which is 3 interlocking triangles which represent the 9 worlds and manifest reality. So all of these concepts together knotted themselves up in my brain, and that's where I've come to so far with this idea of the wordless aeon.
Yeah, well, when I think of the wordless aeon or the word aeon, I think of like a certain period of time where it operates, but I feel like the Apophis curriculum and the idea behind it and the wordlessness and the way I described it, how it weaves through everything, it is timeless. It's like the aeon that makes space to hold all the other aeons. I don't know. Makes sense.
It's a word of the void. It's not tied down in time. Things are or they are not, and they can be both at different times. But I don't know how far you want to go into this now, but this led me down all sorts of byways in the later books when it came to just thinking about the nature of time and space.
Yeah.
The way I hold it now, if you can picture this incredible multi-dimensional knot which contains everything that will ever be, it contains every decision that can ever be made. You have in some ways it's similar to the many worlds theory of quantum physics, which every time you're faced with a choice, reality splits and you have this path that way and that path that way. No, don't look at it like that. Look at it in a simplified form as, say, a tree, because almost every mythology views the world as a tree. It has roots, it has branches, branches have twigs, it's forever splitting and going in different directions. Now picture yourself as a consciousness entering that world, being born at a specific time. And you're moving along a branch, and this is your reality. But all the other branches exist on that tree, including the roots, things which maybe happened and were gone millennia ago. They're still a part of that tree of reality. And you're moving along your branch, and you reach a decision. The branch splits. Which way do you go? The other branch is still there on the tree. It's just that your path, your life, your world is now on this branch, in this little bubble, which is your reality going along it. And so I began to look at it as if life and the universe was a kind of amusement park ride, if you like, where everything's already written. Every possibility already exists. There is no time. What there is our experience of consciousness moving and transforming itself in response to stimuli as it chooses. We enter on a certain path and we steer our way along choices, but they all exist. And that is the universe. Another way to look at it, maybe a simpler way. I have a book here. I'm reading this book, say, on this page, but all the other pages are already written. Obviously, we're talking about something that splits many times. Okay, then. It's one of those adventure game books you used to get.
Yeah, the Choose Your Own Adventure.
Yeah, where you can flip back and forward. And the direction your story takes depends on your decisions. But they're all in there. They all exist. That book is unchanging. It contains them all.
So I guess my question on that would be, with the Choose Your Own Adventure book, we have the option to rewind and go down a different path and make a different decision. What's the, I guess, manifestation, like equivalent of that in our world? And what's the difference between the path that we've taken, and obviously it changes the path untaken. And how is that relevant to us anymore once we've taken another branch?
It doesn't have to be in our manifest life. Look at it another way. The next step forward from that model is a computer game. If you take, say, one of the more sophisticated open world computer games like you have these days, maybe one of the multiplayer ones, so you've got other people in there as well doing their thing, and it's not just your mind with a computer. You have anything that can happen in that game has already been accounted for in its code. Any possible response to anything the player does is accounted for. And then it's all compressed into zeros and ones. It's only manifest when you're actually doing it. That image you see on your screen where you're seemingly moving through a 3D landscape, that landscape is perceptual. It's created by the program as you move through it. But if you've gone another way, that already exists in the program too. All of these parameters, possibilities exist. You're the one who's choosing which path through those possibilities you're taking now.
And I guess that would change how you view sorcery and manifestation and magical practices, because I guess, it's already there. So you just need to tell the computer program, I want to end up there. And so it just tracks your line back. Is that how you kind of think of sorcery?
Yeah, the way I tend to think of it these days is as you look at the world, you're looking at a series of ongoing events, and there's a pattern behind them. Everything has a pattern behind it. There are, in the natural world, you've got the various stresses and changes which are caused by the turning of the seasons and things like that. You have movements within the earth itself, within the sea, some of these things which take place over enormous geological ages, but they're still ongoing. And then you have the smaller, more immediate things which change patterns, like somebody decides they're not going into work today. And so they're short-staffed, and so this happens and that doesn't get done. But there are patterns and causes behind all of these things, and you just kind of get a snapshot of what's going on. You get a feel for the currents which are coming to manifestation around you, and Magick is learning to steer them, to give them a tweak, so that instead of going straight that way, they veer off that way.
So on the grand scale of this, I'm interested as how you would see how this all operates. So the kind of way I would see it, I guess, is that we all have like almost this gravitational pull of what we want, and we're pushing and pulling the world and reality as we see fit. But then on the grand scale, we've got lots of different consciousnesses doing this all the time. So I may want this, but this person may have a stronger willpower, so they're drawing and then altering mine. But then I guess, so if we add my will together with yours and all the others, but then do you think there's something else going on behind it all as well? So do you think it's just human consciousness pushing and pulling reality, or do you think there's actually something else other than that adding variables to it?
There are variables, yeah. I mean, this explains a lot of why the world is the way it is, because you've got a huge number of mixed up people in it, all wanting to do their own thing. But in a sense, that's the way it has to be on a moment-to-moment basis, because if that's not happening, if we don't have some opposition to our own will, you don't have anything, because you have nothing to react to. If you don't have something which you can't control or which isn't under your control, then you have no agency at all. Because if everything that you think just happens immediately, then there's no distinction between you and anything else. It's all just your own thoughts. And yet the purpose of manifestation, and certainly in my philosophy, the idea of consciousness entering into manifestation, splitting itself, taking different forms, is to see how it can change, to see the transformation. It is almost like a game, and look at it this way: every time human beings make games, they put conflict and opposition in there as a goal, don't they? Because you want that struggle. You want to win it, but you need something to push against. But yeah, there is more to it than that, I think. And I'll answer that in two ways. One is, let's think back to our kind of virtual reality computer game model again. What happens when you save your game and switch off and you exit that virtual world? You're still there, but you're now in a much bigger space. If we live many times, if we accrue many lives, there's something bigger than us out there, or rather, there's a bigger us out there. And this is one of the things of the later heads, those beyond the fourth. It's getting to know not only who you really are, but who you've been, and who you can still be. It's this looking forward to a future which is almost unimaginable. But also, I mean, almost every mythology has gods. Whether these are created by our intelligence or vice versa, there are larger forces at play out there. And then there's the desire of the dragon itself, before the universe even existed, to extend and to see itself and to see its own transformations in this incredible arena of possibility. And contrary to many occult groups who say that our ultimate goal is to achieve enlightenment and then to withdraw, I don't think that's the case at all. I think there's not enough humility in the occult. There really isn't. You have to look outside of this world at the universe as a whole. Its sheer scale is something that our brains can scarcely comprehend. The span of time, and even if we don't view time as a thing, but the scale of change, if you want to look at it that way, is, again, a scale of enormity that we can scarcely comprehend. We can talk numbers, but those numbers are too big for us to really understand. And that is the exciting thing. We're still so tiny in a gigantic universe. The possibilities for change and for experience are still so enormous. Who would want to get off this journey now?
Exactly. I completely agree.
I don't care how enlightened somebody claims to be. You can be the most enlightened ant in the ant heap, but you still don't know what things are like at the Arctic Pole.
I agree, and I see this a lot.
You look at the universe, that's the scale we're on. We're tiny, and far from being a crushing humiliation, that to me is a wonderful truth. And it makes me think, okay, my consciousness is going to be pushing ahead for so long, so much yet to come, that I can't even begin to imagine it. And that is exactly the way I want it. I want things to keep being new and fresh and exciting. And that to me is the whole impetus of creation in the first place. And if there's any heritage of the dragon within us, I think that's what it is. That's the dragon fire. It's this burning flame, this desire to exist, to experience, and to keep going forward and finding something new.
And that's why I really have loved your work, because even you constantly encourage people to get out of the ritual chamber and go out and experience life and create art. And I do see that in a lot of occultism and spirituality, even some of the yogic practices. It's all about this, heightened of consciousness and awakening, and then the separation from the physical world. It's like people don't know how to have fun and just how to experience. And but yeah, I mean, I've gone through ups and downs, but yeah, I think the thing that brings me back to enjoy life again, even when I get down, is that sense of wonder. And like you said, the realization that I have no idea what the world actually is and what I'm capable of and what we are capable of in multiple lifetimes. And it makes me feel good to know that. I think it kind of gets depressing if we think we know everything.
It's not a humiliating thing either. It might be a humble thing, but it's certainly not humiliating. We should always be proud and excelling in trying to be the very best that we can be, because that's what initiation's all about. It's discovering who you truly are and what you truly want, and really going for it and to get it. And that it does sound a selfish creed to begin with, but it isn't. Basically, it's Crowley's do what thou wilt. It's not do what you like. It's first you have to discover who you truly are. And once you find who you truly are and really set out to put that into full manifestation, it's something to be proud of. And you will be proud of the things you do, because you're no longer acting from that small scale, lower person, selfish aspect, because those petty things don't bother you anymore. So
I think that's a terrifying Yeah, I think it's a terrifying realization for people, though, if they do think that way, and they don't want to take responsibility for that, because I think a lot of people they want to be told what the meaning is. They don't want to, the realization that we are the only ones that create the meaning around things, and that essentially something is meaningful or meaningless, completely dependent upon the way that we see it. It's actually a really terrifying and kind of paralyzing idea for a lot of people that I've found, because they want to be told what the meaning is, what to do, and then just to go along with it. So.
Well, this is the whole point, though. We're the ones who create that meaning, and that's a fantastic thing. But you're right that a lot of people are terrified by this. They're terrified of that responsibility. They're terrified of that scale. It's like people who look up into the sky and just see it going on forever, and they can't face that. And this is why I've never pulled the punches in my books, and I've told some people that it can be a dangerous path, because you start opening your eyes to possibilities and the scope of things, and it's very, very difficult to close them again if you don't like it. And if you're somebody who does not like taking responsibility, does not like to think that, well, you're not on your own. That's not the meaning of it either. But, you are one of the ones cutting the path through the forest. Then, yeah, it can be traumatic for those people. Magic is not... It's often viewed, I think, by people coming to it as an easy path, or an easy way of doing things. It isn't. It's fantastic once you embrace the changes. There's that formula that I often quote. It's in most of my books, I think. Never work magic unless you yourself are prepared to be changed by it. Because whatever you go to do, you are one of the variables in that equation, and it will change you. And if that's the important thing. Do you find change exciting and exhilarating, or are you afraid of it?
And I think that's the kind of fork in the road that I experience and I see in most people. When you come to that realization that everything is like, you're responsible for the meaning of life and what you get from it. Some people will get really liberated by that, and some people just, their whole world crumbles. And I think that's when people might go back to like organized religion or something that gives them meaning, because they can't handle the idea that they're responsible. And I actually went through this. I remember years back, I reached out to you and I was depressed because I think I had that kind of dark night of the soul, that realization that everything that I'm doing is actually only what I make it to be. And there's no, well, there might be, but I perceived that there was no external reality of it. It was only my internal subjective experience of that. And that was actually quite depressing for a little while, because I was like, holy shit, like nothing really matters. But then on the flip side of that, everything matters. But then you sent me on just a random quest, and it actually brought and I think that's the key thing here as well. And going back to the video game idea, if it's a sandbox and we can create whatever quests we want, sometimes we like to, download extra content and have like a pre-made quest that someone else has created, because it feels good to just have a mission and have a quest. And you prompted me to just go on a random quest, and that actually solved it, because it was just, there was no point to it, but it wasn't about the point. It was about the quest.
Yeah. And it was about, you realize in that way that the purposes that you make for yourself, they're not meaningless, because they mean something to you. And that can be from the smallest detail right up to, what you choose your life's work to be. I think it's also important to say that for those people who are terrified by the concept of taking this this kind of responsibility, that's fine too, because you can live a perfectly ordinary life and you're still a consciousness experiencing reality. There is I've already mentioned lives we've lived before and so on. It's not quite the same idea of reincarnation as most religions who hold that idea would teach it, but I do believe that we go through new lives, that we're reborn, because we project again into reality to experience it anew. But there comes a time in that process where you've experienced enough, and to a sufficient degree, that you want to look through the next veil and see what's over the next mountain. You want to sail that sea and see what continents lie beyond it.
Yeah, I'm really interested in your perspective on that as well.
There's no shame or anything in somebody who just wants to stay at home either. There's no this may be the wrong word just to use, but there's no moral aspect to this. It's something you either feel the draw to or you don't. And at some stage, you may do, but it may not be in the life you're leading now. And that's fine. And that doesn't mean that life's wasted, because it's living life, a consciousness experiencing the world. And it will be there and accessible when your consciousness grows to the point that it's looking beyond.
Yeah, because this might lead into too big a conversation that we might have to finish another time, but I'm really interested in your point of view of remanifestation and reincarnation, because that's, I think, another reason why I was drawn to your work, because I've always been interested in like the idea of death and rebirth and what happens. And it's actually been one of my biggest fears since I was like a teenager. I remember having a conversation with my first long-term girlfriend. I was about 18. And I remember saying to her, don't you ever think about what happens when you die and what that is and means and the reality of it. And if you keep your consciousness. And I remember her saying, you're never going to find out. So why would you bother looking? You're wasting your time. And I just remember that moment so vividly. And of course we didn't work out. But and I've just been searching ever since. And I guess my concept of what it is evolving, but I guess in a current idea of how I perceive it, it's like this pool of consciousness, and we like a raindrop, kind of, we're aware of ourselves and we're separate from everything. But then we eventually fall back into the pool again till we get, I guess, evaporated and then precipitated again. But I'm interested in this idea of kind of like armoring your soul against, becoming part of the pool again. And so that you can actually, you're not an empty drop again, or you're not like a clear drop, that you take some of that with you. And that idea of immortalizing your droplet of consciousness and however you perceive that. I don't know if that's too big a conversation to start now.
I'll answer it in part, and I will suggest another podcast as well, because it is a huge question, and it's one where my ideas have changed even as lately as this year. On the basis of things I've experienced. But to answer it in part, let's firstly. Three parts to this answer. It's of crucial interest to me. In the Temple of Set, Leviathan was defined as the principle of continuity and ageless existence. And that word continuity is what's important. It's the continuity of consciousness. And I think that's what you're talking about when you refer to armoring your consciousness. So it doesn't just merge, it possesses a continuity. There's a sense of continuation and of let's look at life now. Let's look at yourself, and now let's look at you, say 15 years ago. Are you the same person you were then? Every cell in your body will have changed. Physically, you're not the same person. You look the same. Now, if we were using Norse soul law, we'd say that's because the shaping principle of your soul is keeping the various cells which grow and come within your body inside your general shape. But every cell in your body is different. You're not physically the same person. Are you mentally the same person as you were 15 years ago? If you think back to where you were then, the kind of thoughts you had, the priorities you had, are you the same person? And of course you're not. You're probably, if you're anything like me, your personality is completely different. People who know you, they'll know you from one day to the next because they see the gradual changes. If you don't see somebody for 15, 20 years, you really have to get accustomed to each other again because you're not the people you remember. And it's not just looks, it's your whole outlooks, personalities, the experiences you've had that have shaped you. Mentally, you're not the same person. Emotionally, you're not the same person. The emotions that drove you then aren't the ones that drive you now. But what you possess is that essence of continuity. So you can trace your consciousness back from now to then. And that person is still within you because of that principle of continuity. Even though you're a completely different person now, physically and mentally, that person that you were 15 years ago is still in you and can be recalled. And it's more than just memory. It's a matter of essence. And that principle of continuity, I think, is the key to extending consciousness.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what, I'm primarily interested in. Because, because even when I think about when I was a child, I'm a completely different person now, but there's certain traits and certain things, parts of myself that I'm actually reconnecting with now, that I really realizing that there was such an important and vital, essential part of who I am as a person and things I've left behind that I'm trying to bring back. I guess, it is I don't know if I want to call it a fear, but I guess a part of me that, I want to bring some sort of that continuity into my next lifetime, and I don't want to lose that. And
again, this is what initiation's all about. I think when you die, these things become clear to you again, because obviously your consciousness then is able to access all that it was, because it's not confined in this physical shell anymore until it dives in again. But it's something that you begin with without necessarily having past life memories and so on, which are always difficult to prove in any case. You pick up a lot of the essence of who you were, and sometimes just little aspects will come to your mind. There are magical practices for, and we better save that till the next podcast, though. For contacting people that you once were, shall we say. But here's another image to finish on for the moment. Imagine that image of the dragon again, the serpent, the worm. And I'm using the Germanic spelling here, W-Y-R-M, the worm, which is the root of all of the dragon myths. It has a segmented body. The worm has a segmented body. And when you see your consciousness, you're the head of the worm, the head of the dragon, and each life beforehand is a segment on that body. And they are all linked, like beads on a thread, if you like, and that thread is continuity of consciousness. So the dragon you are grows the more that you remanifest. Literally, it grows, gains a new segment, but they're all there, and they are all accessible once your consciousness is able to appreciate its own fullness and to look outside of those bounds of time, it's the crux of the fourth head experience, but you know the way the seven heads are structured, that this sort of thing belongs properly to the sixth head, which deals with matters of time and space.
It's something that I haven't delved into fully, but as time goes on, it's becoming more and more important at the forefront of everything that I do. So I would definitely love to chat more about it. And I think you would appreciate this because you're a bit of an anime fan as well. I see this displayed really well in Avatar: The Last Airbender. I don't know if you've watched it, the series, when he finds all these like past versions of the Avatar, and he's able to kind of get all the powers back from all these past selves and then communicate with them individually, but then sync up. And I really like that concept.
Yeah, well, so we can go into it further at a future date if you like.
I would love that. So I guess
to like this again.
I think it's a huge conversation. So just to summarize the end of this podcast and lead it back to where we started, the Apophis curriculum and what you're sharing on House of Mages. If you just want to summarize the course that you'll be sharing on House of Mages to do with the Apophis curriculum, and just a little maybe summary of what draconian magic or the draconian current and how this ties into that means, what that means to you, and who who would be drawn to this work?
Well, the draconian current, obviously by its name, refers to dragons. It refers to that primordial dragon. It's the idea that we are all projections of that dragon's consciousness who have projected into a manifest reality so that we can experience, grow, and really come to know ourselves. And the reason for that splitting is because a single consciousness incorporating all, as we've discussed during this, everything becomes nothing because it's undifferentiated. So you can only really know anything by differentiating. And that's the purpose of existence. Draconian magic draws on the heritage of that dragon, draws on the mythology of the dragon, and it draws on the symbolism of the dragon's 7 heads. Each of these is one of the keys to really unlocking your full potential and your full arsenal as a magician. In the House of Mages, we can look at the first 4 of these heads. The only reason for restricting it to those 4 is because the remaining 3 are ones that really, they are so personal in the way they pan out that you can't have a course for them. They're going to be completely governed by what you find about yourself on the journey. Their kind of scope will be talked about, but nobody can talk you through them. And nobody will need to if you get to that stage, so there's no need to worry about it. We'll be the first head deals with the physical body, your physical abilities, and enhancing those. Some people may get worried that involves loads of heavy exercise. Well, that's not necessarily the case unless that's your personality. It's learning your body and your physical attributes. Second stage is developing the mind, gaining control of your thoughts, learning to steer them, learning to shake off any conditioning, pre-programmed responses. We all have these. We get fed it through TV, advertising, all the time. We all have our hot buttons that people can press, topics where we basically start going off on a tangent. And you can learn to identify these and have a truly free mind. And the third head is where that clarified mind is able to start bridging the gulf between conscious and subconscious. You start taking advantage of all those insights and intuitions that normally you would either ignore or which wouldn't bubble to the surface at all. And this is where we start finding things such as telepathy and other things which are usually classified under psychic abilities and the paranormal beginning to manifest. And then when you've worked through these 3 aspects of yourself, the body, the mind, and the subconscious, and you've begun the process of transforming them into something that's well-oiled and useful, then you can start looking at the 4th head, which is where you're able to use that enhanced consciousness to look back into the void that creation came from, to see the currents of manifestation around you, and to really get a completely new perspective of both yourself and the universe. Now, of course, as I say, there are 3 heads beyond that, but what I've said is quite enough to be getting on with.
Well, I mean, I'm still just touching on the on the third, fourth head. I think. I mean, I think it's not like, I don't see it as like a linear path. It's kind of
not.
a bit more cyclical for me. But
these things are symbols. They they each have their symbolic image. For example, the first head is symbolically represented by a scorpion because it's a creature which has a hard shell. It possesses venom, and it scuttles close along the earth. So it's very much a physical basis. The second head is a thunderbolt because that's the whirling of the mind and the whirling and speed of your thoughts, which you learn to slow down and to really take stock of. So that they each have a symbolic image, but it's important to remember that we talk about 7 heads, but we're actually talking about one draconian essence.
Yeah, I guess as I've been working with them and understanding them, I guess the only way I can explain it is like a pyramid. So I kind of move through all the heads in a kind of way, but then my base was only quite small, so I can only be so high, right? And so then I go back to the start and I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to work on the first head again. And then my base grows, and then my 7th head understanding gets bigger. So I'm kind of moving through each time, but getting then my 3rd head understanding is much higher than it ever was. And it's kind of trying to growing my pyramid, if that makes sense.
That's precisely how it is, yeah. And again, it fits in with that serpent symbolism. The serpents in coils, it deals in cycles, not straight lines. You're continually working through them and going back to early material and finding much more in it than you ever believed was there. And that doesn't stop. It's not stopped for me yet. And I devised the curriculum, so it doesn't stop. You keep going back to it and thinking, oh yeah, I haven't encountered this state before. There's always something new there.
Yeah.
So you do cycle through it, and we were talking earlier. We will structure the courses along those lines so that. Obviously, you start with the first head, and once you've completed the first stage of that, you can either pursue further into the first head, or you can start on the second head. So you can either do it in layers, or one at a time vertically, or a mixture. Each bit will allow access to other bits, like a video game, just as you wanted to be.
Exactly. Awesome. Well, thank you, Michael, for your time, and I really appreciate this. And it looks like there'll be quite a few more podcasts to come on the different subjects that we touched on today. So anyone who's listening, you can come to houseofmages.org, and the Apophis curriculum will be up there on the course, as well as all the links to what Michael does. You can also find more of what he does at theapophisclub.com, and you also have a Patreon as well, where people can come directly to more of the information that you're doing. So where can they find that?
I can't remember. It's an URL with a lot of numbers and things in it. But if
I'll put the link in House of Mages for sure.
Yeah, or they'll find it on the forum page, apophisclub.com, or they'll find it in any of my recent books. There's also the Facebook page, the Apophis Club, where they'll find links to all sorts of things as well.
Perfect. Yeah, so anyone listening, you can come and find all that in the House of Mages section, where Michael Kelly will have his profile and all the links to everything that he does. So thank
I'll
you.
be able to find the Patreon link too.
yeah, exactly. If you ever lose your own page,
I have it bookmarked. Well, thanks, Daniel. It's been a pleasure, and so you've triggered a can of worms with your question about remanifestation.
Definitely,
so we'll have to come. Yeah. We'll have to come back to that at a future date.
Yeah, I'd like to finish with was it the statement of Apap? Is it see if I can remember it? There is never a moment in which you are not. Did I get that right?
That's it. That is one of the rare instances where it's a coded statement. Though to be fair, I do break down most of its permutations in the Book of Apophis. There is never a moment in which you are not.
Yeah, I think after you touching on that not as well, that is actually added a whole new layer to that as well. The not with the K as well. So
yeah.
Beautiful. Well, thank you again, Michael. Really appreciate your time, and looking forward to the future podcast chats.
Yeah, look forward to it. Thanks, Daniel.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Make Yoga Magic Again, the House of Mages podcast. I'm Daniel Arulian Cumming. A huge thank you to Michael Kelly for being my guest on this episode. If you'd like to know more about what Michael Kelly does or get some of his books, I've put some of his links in the show description. As usual, if you'd like to know more about what the House of Mages does, you can head to the show description links or find us at thehouseofmages.com. Thank you, and make yoga magic again.